Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party has elected former Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida as its new leader. That all but guarantees his appointment as the next Prime Minister when Parliament reconvenes this month. Kishida will inherit an economy battered by the pandemic, and with the general election scheduled for November, he'll have to hit the ground running to ensure his party remains in power. Matteo Quaripe reports.
Second time's a charm for Japanese politician Fumio Kishida. He lost a bid to become Prime Minister last year, but on Wednesday he was chosen to lead Japan's ruling party, which will almost certainly make him the next Prime Minister. He says his top priority will be narrowing the income gap.
I would like to increase income and salaries for as many Japanese people as possible. That's the kind of economic policy I would like to take.
It's a pledge that resonates with many Japanese voters whose incomes have stagnated for years.
People my age want to see the economy recover because salaries have been declining. I want to see politicians to take more tangible actions.
After the coronavirus is under control, we need an economic recovery. Politics has to be more people-friendly.
Japan's economy has been sputtering, and the coronavirus pandemic has made things worse. Its GDP is expected to grow just 2.5% this year, the worst among the G7. Consumer spending has plunged by more than 12% due to the pandemic and higher taxes. Economists warn the poverty rate, which currently stands at almost 16%, could worsen if business activity doesn't pick up. And with a general election scheduled for November, Kishida is hoping to woo voters by quickly boosting social spending.
Within this year, I will compile a stimulus package worth tens of trillions of yen, so many Japanese people will want to support us.
Kishida has built a reputation as a centrist candidate and is expected to shore up support from other parties for his economic policies. But activists say that may come at the expense of the climate and social issues.
He has a rather conservative stance. His comments suggest he doesn't understand at all how serious climate change is. He also has a cautious stance on gender and diversity, so I don't see how these policies would advance.
Kishida has been much more vocal on other fronts. He supports the use of nuclear power plants to meet Japan's energy needs, while calling for a global ban on nuclear weapons. And he wants to strengthen ties with the US to counter North Korea and China's growing influence in the region. But with most voters focused on the economy, Kishida may have to set those issues on the back burner if he wants his party to do well in the upcoming polls. Matteo Quaripe, TRT World.
Well, let's get more on this now with Tom Learmouth in London. He's a Japan economist at Capital Economics. Welcome to the program, Tom. Fumio Kishida will be Japan's third Prime Minister in just over a year. Why are we seeing a revolving door of leaders for the country?
I suppose it's partly returning to the norm in some ways. I mean, before Abe was re-elected in 2012, it was very common for the Prime Minister to change every year. That was the norm between about 2006 and 2012. So I suppose in some ways it's a return to that. I think with the ruling party deciding to pick Kishida ahead of the more popular Kono, it runs the risk of that trend continuing. With Kono, you could have maybe seen a longer term premiership, given his popularity amongst the public, and he has various ideas on structural reform, whereas Kishida seems a lot more like Suga in the sense he's very much a continuity candidate. And we could see a scenario similar to Suga where the public quickly gets impatient with him.
We know Japan's previous Prime Minister Shinzo Abe implemented a range of neoliberal economic policies which soon became dubbed Abenomics. The reviews on those policies are mixed. Some say it managed to get Japan out of its deflationary funk. Others say it only worsened income inequality. I'm wondering, how might Kishida shape the economy going forward?
So Kishida has said he wants to focus more on household incomes. He criticized Abenomics for placing too much emphasis on corporate profits. He hasn't given that many indication over how he'd do that, bar outlining that he'd want to see targeted payments to low-income households. Another thing he could do was, as proposed by Kono, his rival, he could take his idea of giving corporate tax breaks to firms that distribute a high share of their wages to workers. But in terms of fiscal and monetary policy, we don't foresee major changes from Abenomics. On fiscal policy, as you said in your feature, he has pledged to compile a large stimulus package worth over 30 trillion yen, which is about 6% of GDP. But beyond that, he's kept the target of balancing the primary budgets by 2025, which is very ambitious given that the budget deficit was about 10% of GDP last year. So we don't think he'll reach that target, but it does suggest that, like under Abe, there's going to be a gradual tightening of fiscal policy once the economy has recovered from the pandemic.
As you say, on his leadership campaign, Kishida pledged to revise that massive stimulus package worth around $270 billion. Is that what Japan's economy needs right now, more stimulus?
I mean, it would certainly help the recovery over the coming months, but I mean, regardless of the fiscal measures in place, the economy should bounce back relatively strongly over the coming months now that the vaccination rate is high and most restrictions have been lifted. Beyond that, probably a gradual tightening of fiscal policy does seem the most prudent way to go about it, given Japan's very large public debt and also given the fact that in the past, very heavy fiscal stimulus hasn't done much to raise trend growth. Probably more worth focus would be structural reforms, but on that, Kishida doesn't seem to have given much indication that he's going to have much more success than Abe in areas such as labour market reform and digitalisation.
Okay, Tom Learmouth from Capital Economics. We'll have to leave it there, but thank you again for joining us on the program.